Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal Podcast. Our guest today is Srinivas Chippagiri. Srinivas is a senior member of technical staff at a large Fortune 500 company. Srinivas, thanks for taking the time to chat.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure being on your podcast.
Oh, my pleasure. But we're going to get into the topics very soon. Before we did that, if you could give a brief introduction about yourself, what you do, and things of that nature to our audience, I would appreciate that, Srinivas.
Sure. So my name is Srinivas. I'm currently working at a Fortune 500 CRM analytics company. So I work primarily on the cloud native engineering and distributed systems space. I worked at companies include Rackware, GE Healthcare, Siemens, and Wipro. So primarily, I'm working on building enterprise scale platforms that are secure, are scalable, while serving customers across multiple geography and industries. So of close to 15 years worth of experience in the software and application space. So right now, I think I also contribute to the broader technology community through writing, speaking, reviewing some technical work, and also mentoring other engineers.
Lovely. Thank you so much for the introduction, Srinivas. So the topics, right? We're going to talk a bunch of things engineering related. And my apologies if I come across as a bit rusty. I'm just getting back from a 6-week vacation in India, and I hadn't been on vacation in many, many years actually. So I've come back refreshed, but also come back with almost no recollection of what I even do for a living. It's too refreshed, if you will. So I've been doing this it's been a 2-month break from a podcast. So, thanks for your patience as I work myself through this.
That's
So topics, right? You had a bunch of, sorry.
yeah,
So you had a bunch of different topics, and we're going to get started with one of them at random, right? And again, there's plenty to talk about here. Let's talk about one of the first things that I have in the list that we had kind of discussed, cloud native platforms. But that's just a broad topic. Let me start off with something more specific. Let's keep cloud native in mind, but I want to start the conversation just given the current time that we are in right now. What are some trends that you see changing in that space? When you talk about cloud native, we're talking cloud native, say, in the summer of 2026. And if we were talking cloud native in 2025 or 2024, what are some of the differences that you can actually think of or that you're running into, Srinivas?
Yeah, I think cloud native is often treated like a collection of technologies, but I see it more of an operating model and an architectural model and an architectural mindset, so to speak. Right. So as of now, the definition of cloud native is slowly evolving. We're using containers. Kubernetes does not automatically make it like a cloud native system. But in addition to that, a cloud native system is also expected to be designed to be able to have elasticity, to have resilience. It has also needs to meet observability requirements, and most of all, it also needs to meet the demands of our existing customers. It needs to be okay with frequent changes. It also needs to be able to recover from failure. So as cloud evolves, we're noticing a shift in the mindset of architecture, shift in the mindset of people who design cloud native systems. And with the current advent of AI, we're also looking at how AI can much further help build these cloud native systems without even having to have written a single line of code. For example, we have developers who built entire websites by themselves and then deployed it without knowing a single line of code of what it does. So I think with AI, we are noticing a change in terms of how things are built. We're noticing systems that are being built much faster, and the time to production is like instant. And we're also noticing people who are not developers trying to make something meaningful and then build their own systems. So that is how I think with the advent of AI, I see cloud native systems slowly evolving.
Okay, thank you for that. You mentioned, people who are not coders, right? And that's vibe coding is fairly common these days. I mean, the effectiveness of that approach and how far that goes, it varies from organization to organization. So in your experience, Srinivas, how are you seeing that actually be implemented in the real world? In other words, I've talked to a lot of founders who run smaller companies, and a lot of them were not technical founders. And they're like, you know what? We've been able to sort of wipe code our way through to a prototype, or perhaps even through the production. But then once they are live in production, they've found that sometimes there's more challenges than they may have anticipated. So there's this. We are in a situation where we all understand and agree that engineering is not going to be anything like it was like 10, 15 years ago, right? There's no two ways about that. More people can build software. But at the same time, like I just told you, I got back from a vacation in India and I've had conversations with people like back home. I'm not seeing that take effect in a lot of these organizations, maybe in smaller companies, mid-sized companies. But I've had some conversations with folks in large companies, and outside of, I'm not talking the hyperscalers, but I'm just talking fairly large companies like $50 billion, $100 billion companies or $200 billion companies. They've been letting go of people. The workforce has been changing. But in terms of how each of the engineers has changed the way they are building software, that does not seem to have changed to the extent we seem to be reading in the news. So what is your experience with that? Are you seeing people now being hired who've never coded before and contributing to the development team like a software engineer? Or how do they actually fit into the team currently?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. And we're actually witnessing software development change from what it was traditionally was. Right? So we're seeing the advent of these really powerful models that can do a lot more than just code. So for example, there was a developer that I met a couple of weeks back that, he built his own little tool that does a certain job. And then he was able to build his own website, his personal website, deploy it, run it, and then make automated changes to it without even knowing a single line of what code does. Right. So at this point, what's happening is you're only limited by your curiosity. Okay, so I've built this entire product. I've built this certain, say, a website or anything of that sort. So now, once you start to build that genuine curiosity of trying to learn how this is built, what each line of code is, what each line of code does, I think that itself will take you a long way, right? And then, of course, when you actually deploy things to production, you're not going to be able to foresee what you have originally built. Like you may run into issues, and you may run into problems that you are not necessarily you see in the pre-prod environment, right? So as part of that, we always, at least at the enterprise level, there's guardrails to kind of avoid that. So we have the ability to test what we build within our test environment, and then run into simulate issues that we kind of foresee that might happen. Right. The problem that I see with vibe coding is a lot of times when we push out code, we're only limited by how much we understand what the model has written. So the model has some very complicated algorithmic logic that it has put in place. So the model understands how that works. Now the onus is on the person who pushes it to prod. Like, hey, I need to understand what the model is doing. So now your ability to kind of understand what that code has written kind of becomes directly proportional to how the system performs and how we're able to kind of debug issues.
Okay, so that's a good point. Let me interrupt you there. So let's say there's a person who's probably not a traditional engineer, at least, but the way engineers were in the past,
Right.
was able to generate this code using a number of different tools. And then it gets to the point where the code needs to be sort of reviewed. How are you seeing that review happen these days? Let's say when I talk to people, and I'm using this ourselves, a lot of the code is generated these days. Maybe not 100% of the code, maybe 70%, maybe more. But when let's say I'm a developer, or maybe not a developer, but somebody who's generating this code and creating that and giving it to you as a reviewer, how are you going about reviewing this? Is there a tool that you use? What are some tools that you might use to review the code? Because what's the point in Srinivas as a human reviewing code that was not even written by Krish as a human? If Krish generated 90% of the code, Srinivas should only be reviewing the other 10%. Is that true? Who should be reviewing the 90% of the code that was actually generated?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So the issue that is happening right now is there's something called reviewer fatigue. So developers now are pushing so much code. So instead of actually kind of building it. And then, I mean, after building it, so now the onus is on the other developers who actually review the code to understand what the model has built, and then to ensure that what it does what it claims it does, right? So as part of that, the task of the developer is not just to kind of go through every single line of it and then make sure it does what it does. So in order to kind of help out with that, we have an agent which also reviews the code. So I have an agent A that writes a whole bunch of code, and now I have my own agent B that reviews what agent A has written. And then you give it a prompt saying, hey, this is what's supposed to look like, and does this code basically do what you want it to do? So the initial round of review is not done by human, but it's done by an agent. So the way the human in the loop works is like, hey, at some point there needs to be a human that does the gatekeeping. Right? I'm not going to be able to push things to prod as is. So at least I need some sort of a human to be there. So this is where I come into picture. I'm like, hey, this is agent A has done this, agent B has reviewed what it is, and then given a list of comments. So let's see how valid these are. So I propose at least a two rounds of review, where one is done by the agent, so that way it reduces your cognitive load, and the second round is done by the actual engineer. So who can have, okay, this is what my agent found. So let me go and validate these claims. So that is something that I've personally found to be very helpful when especially dealing with large code bases and large merge requests. Secondly, for wipe coders in general, it only comes with experience. So as you build more and more and more features, as you understand what each code does, the model itself will tell you, like, hey, why did I add this? If you just ask the model, like, why did you do this or this, it basically explains to you the entire logic. So as long as you have the tenacity, the resilience to keep trying to learn what model has built, you may start from zero, but eventually you'll get to a point where you understand what the model has built. So the only limiting factor is yourself.
Fair enough. So compared to 2 years ago, Srinivas, how much lesser code are you writing today? Like literally, what I mean by writing lesser code is, 2 years or maybe 3 years ago, when someone had a problem, a product manager gave something to the dev team, you actually started with almost 0 lines of code. I say almost, but let's say it's a new feature, it was 0 lines of code. And then you got started there. First question is, currently when you're getting these requirements, are they still requirements in English without code being generated, handed over to you as a developer? Or is a fair bit of the code already generated by the team that's handing over the requirements to you?
That's an interesting question. So we are basically noticing a change in the way traditional product management works. 3 years ago, we had product managers who would talk to the stakeholders, get the list of requirements, create a product requirement doc, basically a PRD, and then hand it over to the engineering team. Like, hey, this is what we think is going to be a good value add to the company. This is what customers want to pay for. And that's why you should build this. So now we're reaching a phase where product managers are now building a sort of like a mock-up of what it should look like. For example, a product manager wants a web page to look in a certain way. So we're seeing for PMs basically build like a little mock-up of that. Hey, this is what it's supposed to look like. This is what the exact button should look like. This is what the menu should look like. So we're seeing these AI tools help in building mockups, and then may not be necessarily the business logic, but at least a way of now that's helping developers, because now you know what the PM actually wants instead of reading it from a document. You have the actual like a working prototype. So we take that and then say, okay, then we kind of go back to our PRD, like a product requirement document, and say, okay, these are the backend functionalities that it needs, right? And then we have the model read what our document says, and then the model try to understand the code base and then tries to integrate our feature into that as best as it can. And then we as developers are now essentially reviewing what the model has done, and then making small these changes to the prompt, or making small changes to the features that we want to make it look like what it's supposed to. And then the development cycle has gone like from weeks to, I would say, like days. So it's massively helped. And then compared to coding that was 3-4 years ago, where we used to go off of a Word document, now we kind of go off of like a prototype that's already given to it. So that way, I think AI tools are essentially helping build products much, much faster.
So the thing that you said there, right? A lot of what a developer did years ago,
Mhm.
he or she does not have to do that anymore, right? Whatever you summarize there, a lot of it would have typically been done by developer.
Mhm.
I been doing this for 25 years myself, and I know things have changed quite a bit. And not everybody is yet in agreement. Sometimes there's a sense of denial, saying, "Hey, you know what? I'm more important than I might actually be." But
Mhm.
given everything that you said there, Srinivas, where does the need for a developer arise in that example? Because everything that you just said there, I feel like I could almost hire somebody who's a decent problem solver and have them do this job. Why is there still a need to actually go look for the, again, I'm not talking companies where they are building fundamentally AI native solutions. I'm not talking the Meta or the Alphabets or any of those companies, right? I'm talking the rest of the companies that are building software, leveraging a lot of these models and services and AI tools and technologies that are out there, correct? So if you go to AWS or go to Google Cloud or Azure, you see a bunch of these AI tools available, and somebody needs to start using them. Now, yes, your previous dev experience, one might argue, can
Mhm.
help you because you understand what deployment is, you understand what caching is, you understand what the rights and wrongs are. But at the same time, somebody is getting out of college today, or maybe got out of college 5 years ago, is a decent enough problem solver. Maybe they can do all of this, right? So, I mean, why do you think we still need to hire a software engineer in these examples?
Yeah, so to answer that question, so we have to first go take a look at why companies hire engineers, right? So a software engineer or engineer for that matter, the primary role of engineer is to solve problems, right? So a company has problem A. So how can I, as a software engineer, come in and then solve the problem for the company? And the bigger the problem you solve, the better reward that you get, right? So coding is an aspect of software engineering. It's not just the only thing that the software engineers do, right? So there's the entire software development lifecycle that we have to kind of be valid at. So coding is just one small little pillar of it, which the AI tool is gonna help come in and build stuff.
I mean, to be honest, it was not a small pillar. A lot of us got paid literally to do that 40 hours a week.
Yes, so a lot of us did get paid to do that 40 hours a week, but I think it's also got to do with I would say the domain knowledge that you bring in. Like, for example, like certain things have to be done in a certain way, or certain things workflow is done in a certain way. So that is the domain knowledge that you bring in, right? So the model can help you write code that solves a certain problem, but it may not necessarily know the specific workflow, the specific tribal knowledge that you need for that exists in the company. The domain knowledge may not necessarily be completely that can be solved by a model. Right. For example,
I think that's yeah, I think it's very important you said that because you know 5 years ago, if you told me subject matter experts,
Mhm.
I thought, I mean, of course they were important people, but I thought the developer was more important relatively than somebody who was a subject matter expert. But like you just mentioned there, that things are changing quite a bit, right? And now it's much easier to hire somebody or use a tool to build software, but not just as easy to have that subject matter expertise. With that, I want to actually have a segue here. You mentioned models, right? We talked, the need for these models.
Mhm.
One of the challenges that we are running into, Srinivas, is when you go try to solve an engineering problem and you want to rely on a model, whether you're running those LLMs locally or in the cloud, doesn't matter. How do you go find? I mean, again, you could go to Hugging Face, you can go look up, do all of this research and check it out. But I feel like a lot of time is spent or wasted, however you look at it, in
Mhm.
finding the right models that you can actually leverage. Can you give us some tips on, okay, there's a lot of this, there's going to be a proliferation of these models as years go by. How do you find what are one or two good ways of finding the right models to solving your problems, whether it's generating code or doing something else that's domain centric or industry specific? How do we go find these correct models?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think for these models, what I've noticed is right now my expertise is basically in the software development side of things. So as part of that, we do have a few solutions in place. We have Cloud Code, we have Cursor, we have a whole bunch of Devon and other tools that are kind of working in the space right now. So basically, you have to look at each of these models are kind of trained on certain training data set, right? So they may do certain tasks really well. They may do like a general task, maybe at a certain level. As long as you kind of identify, hey, which model is something that you want for your specific task. For example, like we use Cloud Code for the most part, Cloud Code and Cursor, because those are models that are specifically trained and designed to build software. They're trained on like thousands and thousands of, maybe millions of repositories, millions of code bases. So they're focused on that area. So does that mean they're only used for that? No. So there's like specialized for certain tasks. As part of that, what we need to look for is, hey, how is my model performing? How is my tool performing for the specific use case that I want? Like for example, maybe Gemini may be good at certain things like visual or maybe like picture management, but it may not be necessarily the right fit for the software generation or maybe code generation. Maybe Cloud Code might be better. Certain parameters of the model might be better. Even within the model, there are versions which are better than, for example, Fable might be a better fit than Opus, or maybe that's. So it is basically you try to focus
But
on.
Srinivas, how do you discover that though? So there are a lot of these models.
Mhm.
There's open source, bunch of open source models as well. So what is the process of going and finding that? Is that done? First of all, who does it in the team from what you've seen? Is it each engineer trying to go figure out what makes sense? You talk code generation, but let's go outside code generation. Let's say you're building something for the fintech industry, right? One of the things we are working on currently at Snowpal. How do you go find models that serve that industry? How do you do comparisons, draw parallels, and see which one might makes the most sense for us to go with?
Yeah, that's so for that, typically what you would do is take a look at what existing models that there are in the marketplace that are available for your domain. There's a lot of these small AI startups that are coming in. What they do is they do one thing really well. For example, there might be an AI startup that specifically focuses on video processing. There might be an AI startup that specifically does, say, image processing. That's only trained on that data. So first thing you would do is take a look at, hey, this is my task. Based on my research, I've noticed these certain models are good at these things. Let me go and do my own benchmarking of how those models work for my specific use case. So that's how I would kind of go about it. And then see which model does the best that you want to do on the same task, and then go from there.
Okay, and let's talk about costs and cost management, right? That's a conversation that cannot be skipped. I've seen these days.
Yep.
I think I heard Jensen Huang in I think one of his write-ups or conferences. He said that if a developer was paid like $500,000, he would have expected that developer to use tokens that are worth like $2 million, right? And that's coming from Jensen Huang, the company that does benefit from selling these things, right? But not everybody has the bandwidth or the money to afford that. So on one side, you want to use a lot of these tools to actually, whether it's code generation or whether it's doing UI, UX work or whatever it is that you're doing, not do it at all and have somebody else like the tool, the agent do it for you. But there is a cost associated with it, like a dollar value, and that not every company can literally necessarily afford that. So how do you see that being managed? Like, let's say if Srinivas decides not to write any code on a Monday and have the agent or the tool do it, maybe it'll still work fine, but it means it costs your company a lot more money than it could have cost because they're still paying you or I to begin with. So how are you seeing companies manage cost and resources in the context of this building software?
Yes, so I think token cost is one of the most talked about aspect here. So a lot of companies are now figuring out, hey, and this is an ongoing challenge for most companies. Like, how do I measure the amount of money I've spent on tokens versus the amount of output that I've received from using these tokens? And how do I compare that with traditionally like developer work hours, right? So the way I kind of look at it is if a task takes X amount of time to solve it, and then you spend Y amount of dollars to get it solved in a lesser amount of time. So the time saved, is the time saved, the dollar amount of the time saved, greater or lesser than the amount of money you spent on it?
Srinivas, it's not easy. I know what you mean there. It's easier said than done. You give a feature to like three developers, you can hardly agree upon how much time it should take. Depends on the experience, how long you've done this job, how long you've been in this particular team, how much you understand the domain. So it's not an easy way to measure that, correct? Or is there an easy way to measure it?
So you're right. Yes. So there's no specific way or easy way to kind of measure how long a thing might take. For example, someone who has like 15, 20 years of experience might just do something much, much faster than someone
Or
who's
slower, or slower, given the way the world works, right? Yeah.
so slower. The way we kind of estimate things is like, hey, this is the level of competency that we have in a specific team. Based on this level of competency, this is how much we kind of think it might take. And this is not an exact science. So there's always like an approximation that happens here and there. Most of estimation happens in based on the level of competency that a specific team or company has. So if
But
that
Srinivas, is there like token allocation per member? Meaning saying, hey, Srinivas,
Mhm.
you're paid X dollars per year, so you get tokens worth Y. Is there some sort of pre-allocation so you know what you're working with? How does that work?
Yes. So usually companies don't like unlimited cost. So they're very scared about, hey, I just might run into a huge bill at the end of the month, and which I'm not necessarily uh, okay with paying. So usually what companies do is they put a cap on each developer saying this is how much tokens you can use. And if you feel the need to go beyond that, let us know and then we'll figure something out. So that's usually how companies are doing it because most companies and any business in general, they're very cost sensitive. And they don't like unlimited anything that can potentially create unlimited cost for them. So most of
So
these
is it per developer or is it per team? How does it manage? How do you think it has to be managed?
I think it has to be managed per developer because that way you kind of are a little bit more judicious in terms of certain developers may use more tokens, certain developers may use lesser tokens. But if you do it as part of a team, then there might be instances where certain people might use most of the tokens. So that way you're kind of creating like a little
No,
yeah.
makes sense, right? So are we saying that the measure of a developer, like when, or an engineer or resource, any resource in a company when it comes to review time, is how much money am I paying you as an employer? How much tokens have you used? And collectively, that's the cost that you brought to the table. And what have you accomplished for that cost? Is that how you see companies making those judgments?
That is typically how I see companies usually make those judgments. They look at, hey, this is how much the employee is being paid. So maybe an hourly at his level, because there may be with levels of engineering as well. So basically, they're looking at, hey, if you're going to use this many tokens, show me the amount of productivity that you've got. I mean, how much have you gained, and how much have you done things faster? So that's how most companies kind of look at how things are being done. Because at the end of the day, for a company, it's all about the cost, right? So if a certain thing costs more and you get the same result, you probably want to do it like the cheaper way. So that's how companies kind of look at it. If I'm
Okay,
being
makes sense. We have like another 12 minutes. I'm going to give you a few minutes to ask me anything you want to ask, but a couple of quick things I want to wrap up on with is impact on SaaS companies, right? Today, I think Workday is announcing, their earnings. I don't know what happened. I have to check to see, but just a random example of a SaaS company. But if you take companies like Atlassian or Workday or, Intuit, the list keeps going on. They've all had a disastrous last 2 years or so, give or take, right? They've lost about 60% in their valuations. For a long time, the last 2 days, the market's been treating the semiconductor companies very well, like really, really well. And there are days where the software companies do catch up. So there's sort of a dichotomy as I see where there's still not so much clarity. The one thing that's clear is these SaaS companies have certainly lost a lot of their market cap, essentially. Right? That's undeniable. Because people are like, why do I have to pay somebody per seat when I actually can start building it for free or for cheaper, much cheaper amounts? There's pros and cons. Like in 2 minutes, what is your takeaway? What do you see as the future for these SaaS companies?
Yeah, so I think there is certain sentiment from the market towards the SaaS companies in general. And then typically, when you look at any cycle, right, there's money always moves from what is hot right now. So money moves from, let's say, the typical SaaS companies. So now AI is the hot big hard thing. So let's put money on that. So money moves from different sectors. So tomorrow there may be something else which might take the cake. So money moves from that sector to another sector. So I think the SaaS apocalypse in general is being talked about a lot recently, but I think it may necessarily be like overblown, because SaaS is not just code. It's also years and years worth of domain knowledge, years and years worth of customization,
Governance, yeah, and the list
governance,
goes on, right? Yeah.
compliance. Yeah, there's compliance, there's governance, there's regulatory requirements. There's so much that goes into building a SaaS product, right? And then a lot of these industries are so integrated into these products. It's at this point, it's very hard for them to kind of move away from certain tools that they're using into another tool. And you can wipe code a little tool out of maybe from your laptop or anything of that sort. If you have like maybe 5-6 employees, yeah, that should be okay. But how do you scale it? How do you scale it to millions of users, millions of people, relating records? That is where the true test of a SaaS product comes into picture, right? So these are things that are still need professional experience and professional background and professional tools. So that's what I see. I mean, right now the market sentiment is not necessarily towards the SaaS-based companies, but I think the value that they bring is not just in the tool, but also the expertise, the domain knowledge, the compliance, the governance, and there's so much to it.
Lovely. I have two last questions for you, and then you can ask me anything you want to ask me. One is, again, this is not financial advice, but we are actually currently working on building fintech APIs as an API company. So we spend a fair bit of time in the stock market. So if you had $100 today and you could invest it in 4 companies, Srinivas, this is not financial advice, just out of curiosity, what would those 4 companies be?
So let me first go back by saying that if you want to invest your money, just for anyone, for the average Joe, just put it in an index fund. I mean, whichever is the one that.
Which fund? Give us 2. Which fund?
I personally invest mostly in S&P 500, and then the Vanguard, the Vanguard version of it. So that's like the tried and tested way of building wealth overall. And then that's what I would put my money on at this point, because at the end of the day, my goal is like, you want to put your money where you can sleep peacefully. That's my goal. So as long as you can have that, and that's a good way to kind of build wealth and then teach future generation of saving for their future, like, responsibly. But to answer your question on 4 different companies, I would probably put it in. I wouldn't want to give like a specific names, but probably the sector where I think there's going to be like fair amount of growth. For example, early stage companies which are growing, which are generating 30, 40, 50% year-on-year revenue. So those companies, and then maybe AI space is something that's growing. Cloud data centers is the space where things are growing.
Okay, which industry would you avoid? Is there an industry that you want to avoid?
Let me see here. I think I probably would avoid industries that I feel are like stagnating. Anything which hasn't grown much in the past couple of years.
You're very politically correct. No, I'm just messing with you. My last question for you before you can ask me is, you're going for dinner, you can order whatever you want, any cuisine. What would be your order for an appetizer, entree, and dessert? One dish in each of these 3 categories.
That's pretty cool. So I think I would probably order, let's see, like a veg roll for appetizer, and probably maybe like a biryani for my main course. And then for dessert, probably I would order.
Well, I mean, what biryani? You have to be a little bit more specific there.
Or maybe like a veg biryani. I would probably order that.
Okay.
Probably order that.
Dessert?
And then, dessert, you can't go wrong with ice cream. I mean, I would just wash that down with a little bit of ice cream. So,
okay, fair enough, right? This is a question I ask everybody. Now that I'm back from India after spending a decent amount of time, that if someone asked me this question, I would have like 200 things to say. But thank you very much for those answers. We've got like 5 minutes. I want to give you an opportunity. I know I've been throwing questions at you. Appreciate your responses and patience there. Is there something you want to ask me?
Yes. So I think you've been in the industry for a lot of many years now. You've seen the entire industry evolve for, I think, more than like two decades. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. So, what
Yeah.
are some of the things that you've noticed that are currently that you see that can potentially be the next big thing?
Well, I would say, I don't know, let me be reasonably specific
Mhm.
to some extent, I think, right? I don't know, I wish I knew that I don't have to see the crystal ball, but I can tell you that as an engineer, I can tell that engineering has changed so much that unless either if you've been somebody who's building software for many years, it's much more challenging for those people, and by those people I say I'm looking at myself, because if you're getting into the industry now, you've not done it any other way, so you can learn it the way you could possibly do it. You're probably never going to write 100% of the code ever, so you don't need to care about how somebody did it. But a lot of us have done it a certain way, and we have this muscle memory,
Mhm.
and we have a trust issue as well. When even if the tools generate this code, you're still not convinced. You feel like you have to sort of invigilate or supervise a tool that probably does a much better job than you probably can, but still that habit doesn't die soon.
Mhm.
That needs to change. And the notion of architecture, like I've been architecting software for many years now, but I think at this point I feel like we've taken a pause at our company in terms of what we're looking to build next,
Mhm.
because we want to do it not the way we've done it in the past, Srinivas, but how we probably should be doing it today. And that just doesn't mean that you use Cursor or an IDE with a plugin that generates code, but it also means fundamentally the problems you're solving have to be different from the problems you were solving in the past. It's not just the end outcome that we end up solving the same set of problems but differently because we're generating code using different tools and technologies. But the challenge we are running into to some extent is the problem itself has changed, right? You're not necessarily going to Google Cloud or Azure or AWS necessarily anymore for doing deployments. There's a lot of the neo cloud providers, for instance.
Mhm.
God knows how long a lot of these companies might survive, but
Mhm.
you want to pick the right ones and use the right set of tools. So to me, even as an engineer, it feels like a rebirth of some sort. I
Mhm.
feel like I cannot build software like I've casually been able to do in the last so many years and decades.
Yeah,
So I feel like you're going back to college, going back to school, doing things the wrong way many times before you end up doing things the right way, right? So as long as you have that urge to want to make that adjustment, I
Mhm.
think you're all right. If not, again, I said I just got back from India. I looked up a couple of businesses that are doing very well there.
Mhm.
Not so much software as I've seen, but running a spa or a nice coffee shop and charging exorbitant amounts of money
Uh-huh.
seems to be doing quite well, right? You don't even have to bake the best cake or the bread. People are willing to pay for it. So I told my family back home that, you know what? If things get really difficult, maybe opening a spa is not a bad idea. So I say it in a funny way, but I've talked to a lot of engineers who are genuinely looking at doing something different because this change that's coming or has come already is, I don't know if it's up everyone's alley necessarily, right? So either you accept it, make those adjustments, chug along and do what you want to do if you enjoy doing it.
I agree. Yeah.
But if you're averse to that kind of learning, I think you have to make a serious decision. I don't think you could survive by writing the basic average code that you might have written in the past 10 years, because that need for that engineer is gone, has just
I agree.
disappeared, right? It's just
I
a
agree.
matter of fact that people have to come to terms with that. Whether they do it or not is a different story. Yeah. I
I
don't know if that answered your question, but at least that's what came to my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely. I mean, I definitely agree with that. I think a lot of things have changed over the past couple of years, and then the ask is slowly going up and up and up. Last question before we can wrap up. I think you've been an entrepreneur, you've been a founder. So, what would you say are like the top three qualities that a founder must have to kind of at least ensure that he can successfully kind of build things and then take his company forward?
Well, it's a great question because, I wake up every day thinking I should pick up a job
Mhm.
sometimes and then just have a vacation. And it's
Mhm.
kind of weird that I say pick up a job and have a vacation because, I did work for companies for a long time.
Mhm.
I was given tasks, I got it done, came back home or work from home most of the time. And I didn't have to think about it after 6 o'clock or whatever, 7 o'clock, right? But that luxury I've not had for the last 10, 12, 15 years, I think.
Agree.
Being an entrepreneur is the most difficult thing I've had to endure, if you will. So the three things I would say being okay with failing,
Mhm.
repeatedly failing, right? Not just one time or two times, failing time and again in every single thing that you do so you can relearn it and do it differently. That's one thing. Number two, you've got to give up everything else that you had any interest in. Socializing, Diwali parties, I haven't gone to one in like years. Even travels, I haven't done in a long time. This was a vacation after like 10 years, I think. So you've got to make some serious sacrifices. If you think you can just go live life like you went to work and then run a company, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And I think third is you've got to really enjoy what you're doing, because that's the only thing that's going to keep you going. It might sound cliched, but it's not. I don't know what else to say, because everything is going to test your mettle. Every nerve of yours is going to be tested on a daily basis. And if you're doing it because someone asked you to do it, or because you're chasing a lot of money, then you will not survive this game, right? You're going to have to enjoy this. You're going to have to enjoy the fact that you're not going to Italy on vacation or driving a Tesla X, for instance, or the fact that every dollar that you even manage to make somehow in the meantime ends up going back into the company, right? So there are times when we would think about, hey, do we want like $100 dinner, or should we take that money and put that into an ad on Instagram or Meta or something like that, right? Yep. I wouldn't have thought 10 years ago that I would do things like that. If I had $100, I would just go, maybe $500, go play poker and lose that money. But today, or like, do I do I go play poker, or do I actually put that money into a LinkedIn ad, for instance? And in LinkedIn's ad campaigns are very poor, actually. They eat up all your money much sooner, and then the conversion rate is quite abysmal, but that's a different problem. But you asked for three things, I'll give you a fourth one there, right? The ability to wear different hats as well, right? You cannot just be an architect, an engineer. You got to be the janitor, you got to be the guy who makes the coffee, or the girl who does that, or you're going to have to, whether you like it or not, you're going to want to have to wear all of these different hats, because unlike working for a big company or a mid-sized company, you don't have a database engineer, you don't have a systems engineer, you don't have you don't have an application architect, you don't have a database architect, you don't have a tester, you don't have a product manager. You've got like 3 people, you've got to do like 30 different things. So you've got to be ready for all of these things, right? And it's fun, but it's also hard. You know what I mean? So as long as you enjoy doing that, it's worth it. But if money is the motivator, I think there's other ways to make money much easier, right? Spa is an option. People are making a lot of money back in India. Yeah,
I agree with that. I think that's definitely the case. I think most of the people I've spoken to have kind of touched up on these topics that you mentioned. So number one is like, love what you do, and then do it because you love it, not because of the money. And then second thing is be resilient. There's going to be hundreds and hundreds of failures along the way. So you just got to keep going. Like every day you wake up and just keep going. And then that's one thing I've noticed as well. And then you mentioned wearing a lot of hats. That is definitely the case with startup. I worked with a startup before, so I've worn multiple hats, and then work like hell. So like every day, just keep working, put the hours in, and then eventually you'll be successful. So hopefully,
fingers crossed. Yeah, but that's all I have to say. I know we've got a minute. Anything else you want to ask me?
I think that should be it. I think thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure talking with you, and then I wish you good luck in your startup, and then I hope it goes well. And then,
thank you much. I appreciate that. Just before we wrap up here, folks, again, this is Srinivas Chippagiri. Thank you very much for all of your thoughts and inputs. I know there was plenty more to discuss, but I'll try to squeeze as much as we can in a 45-minute window. If you want to have a much lengthier conversation, I'm here, going nowhere. We can dig into every topic of interest, whether it's cloud native or API first, or AI models or LLMs and whatnot. Yeah. Currently, I'm looking to buy a machine that runs a lot of these LLMs. So if you end up coming back to the podcast, Srinivas, you could also talk about my challenges of picking the right machine that actually can run all of these LLMs, because I know we have 30 seconds. I was just looking it up the other day. Some of the LLMs, the local LLMs that I'm looking to run, they need about 500 gigs of storage. That's insane. Yeah. And then you buy a MacBook with 2 terabytes. It's pricey enough already, but then you're using 1/4 on one of the models. And then if you download 2 others, then you're probably maxing it out, right? So, cost of building software has gone up even for, otherwise, if you're an engineer, you could be cheap and not spend much to build software. But I'm like, looking at the price of these MacBooks, I'm like, oh my God, these things are pricey.
Yeah, I think the hardware cost is like skyrocketed because of the demand. Because basically, the demand is coming from building all these large data centers. All of these data centers need hardware, so that's why we're facing a little bit of a crunch
No,
time.
absolutely.
And
But I'll wrap up there. Folks, I'm going to include the link to your LinkedIn profile. I think you shared that with me. But again, folks, thanks to Srinivas for taking time. Much appreciated. Srinivas, just hang on for like 30 seconds after we're done here. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me.
Lovely. I just stopped it. I want to make sure the upload's complete. It'll probably take a minute. It's almost